Well, congratulations on your medal, your Vega medal.
Okay, thank you very much.
I talked to Alec Murphy, and he talked about his trip to Sweden for that. That was quite an experience, he said.
Yeah, that was fascinating event, but we were lucky to get there under these conditions now.
Yeah. So I'm going to just go through some of the questions and get your perspective. I actually don't know the answer to this, but have you had much of an involvement in the IGU?
Yes, I have been earlier quite a lot. I was in the steering group of the Commission on Cultural Geography for 8 years when Benno Verlen was leading it, and then I have been participating in several meetings of history of geographical thought and also political geography. So I have been looking this issue from different directions.
So what would you say, since this is about obviously political geography and the Commission on Political Geography, we're interested in your perspective on what you believe the most important or influential theoretical innovations or movements have been over the last 100 years. The 100 years being arbitrary just because that's the 100-year anniversary of the IGU.
Yeah, it's a tricky issue because when we talk about progress in science, so we can have many perspectives there, and of course, originally during the last 100 years, geography was involved in building state, and it was state related very much through nationalism, educational functions, imperialism in some states. And at some stage after World War II, and especially when so-called critical geography came in, so these perspectives expanded dramatically, and also critical voices emerged, and this tendency is still going on, of course, as we all know who are living today. So this is my general overview. And originally, geographers were involved in geopolitics. Of course, we know that a couple of weeks ago, actually in September, I was in a meeting when I got this medal. I was also in a meeting on Rudolf Schellen. There is a new interest in Schellen's ideas and this great powers versus small states issue. And of course, I'm representing a small state that was also a small state when Schellen was making these books that made a big difference in political geography and political science. So that was exciting meeting. But of course, somebody would say that geopolitics was important until World War II and lost its role. It didn't lose its role, but it changed its functions so that it became part of this global division of East-West. And in the 90s, we know that some new tendencies came from political science and international relations studies, like this dissident international studies and critical geopolitics, which changed quite a lot what happened also in political geography. So some things come up and down, and they can revive in new versions at some stage. So this is maybe bringing into my mind ideas of Raymond Williams, who talks about residual ideas, dominant ideas, and emerging ideas, so that these are fluctuating. And this is my interpretation what has happened also in political geography.
Well, speaking of emerging ideas, do you have a view on some emergent fields in political geography that you consider most compelling in the current day?
Yeah, I think that maybe issues related to, I take broader view on this issue, so that there are issues related to democracy that should be, and they are, I think, also in the future quite important, and also today in some circles, the future of human rights must be important issue in those countries where these issues can be openly discussed. We know that world is getting closed in many places, so that people are very aware of what they can say. And then there is a sort of vicious circle that we all are now familiar. I'm not only talking about this pandemic issue, but I'm talking about population growth, hunger, climate change, human mobilities, migration, refugees, and these are definitely tendencies that are emerging at the moment, and they will be important also in the future, much more important than they are today. Religious fundamentalism, ISIS gave us a harsh reminder what can be the power of religion. I can imagine that these issues are also becoming quite important, and also this growth of autocratic states, which is quite alarming tendency nowadays, I think, so that also in European Union we have witnessed these kind of tendencies. So these maybe are things that I think that they are emerging on agenda nowadays.
Well, it would seem that political geography is well equipped on all of those topics that you mentioned as the key issues of the day to provide key insights. But at least in North America and to some extent in Western Europe, we're always sort of wringing our hands about the health of the subdiscipline, about the health of political geography. So what's your sense of the health of the subdiscipline?
Yeah, I would say that it's in a good shape at the moment. It's very good and very strong. It has been expanding quite dramatically during the period that I have been following from the 80s. And I'm talking both on political geography and geopolitics, which are of course overlapping, but these have a little bit different directions. And my impression is that when I'm thinking human geography as a whole, so political geography seems to be one of the most popular and visible areas. So that it's really a sign of health, of course. There have been new theoretical perspectives. I mentioned already some, like critical geopolitics, and border research has expanded dramatically. It was labeled at one stage quite torpid area of political geography, and now it's very vigorous, and we have very interesting tendencies going on in border research. And what is also important, I think, is the internationalization of the field, so that this is definitely in International Geographical Union's field, so that many people around the world from different states are now involved in political geography. They publish in political geography, they publish in geopolitics, and so that looks good. But then there's also one more important tendency, this interdisciplinary strengthening of the field, so that international relations theory people, political science people, we have as we know, we have common concepts and common interests, and it has been interesting to see that political scientists, for example, have approached me and invited to some conferences and to their edited collections where they are interested, for example, on regions or borders, so that there is a kind of cross-fertilization going on also in this sense, I think. So things look good. And of course, we have a very strong home ground in political geography.
And can you expand on, did you say home ground?
Yes, home ground, so that we have a good basis, we have a strong conceptual basis compared with maybe some other fields who are interested, what are you doing and what kind of conceptual things you have in geography, so they become interested increasingly on our views and research results and approaches.
So obviously you're known for a variety of things related to borders and regions and spatial socialization and other things. So what of your findings or papers do you hope that political geographies in, say, 2030 would find interesting or relevant, and why?
Yeah, it is of course a tricky issue because this is totally in readers' hands. So that, I can imagine, or let's say that my efforts have been focusing on some conceptual elements like regional thinking and especially on the institutionalization of regional spaces and how they are made meaningful. This is something that is definitely going to continue also in the future. But I don't know if the younger generations anymore find my works interesting, or if there will be some other things coming. Normally, ideas are relevant sometime, and new ideas come and replace these. But that's anyway something that I have been happy so far that they have maintained their relevance. Another area is border studies, which I came at the little bit, or let's say at the same time as regions, but after I published my doctoral thesis. So next project was related to border issues, but it was also part of this territory and region building, so that I became interested about the role of borders in this process of institutionalization. And then I was, for some curious reason, I went to Finnish-Russian border and started to study that, and I realized what is really the importance of borders in local life. And then I went to documents and all kind of published works and archives, and I found that this really works at several spatial scales. It brought scale issues to my work, and so it has been moving around these certain concepts. And then, of course, I have the third pillar in my work, if I can say so, is the issue of identity, political spatial identities, and this brings into play regional and national identities. And of course, for national identity, the other side of the coin is nationalism. So this is also something that I have been tried to map in my works, and I think that this is mainly what I think my own contribution.
This is not on the script, but in terms of nationalism, obviously we're seeing globally resurgence of nationalistic thinking. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, you live in the European Union, which was supposedly a post-national project. Any observations about just sort of this rise of resurgence of nationalism globally? How we should think about that?
Yeah, there is a resurgence, definitely, and what happens inside states is not straightforwardly related to this bounded space, but it's also divided. So we all know that in most or quite many countries there are extreme nationalist movements, right-wing movements inside the states, which are promoting strongly this sort of extremism in this sense. And then we have moderate nationalists, and then we have most people who probably don't like this idea. Of course, this is also problematic when we think that human, let's say, evolution of states, and evolution is not a good word actually, because they are not living organisms, but they have a kind of life cycle, and memory comes into play here. So that people who have memories of the destruction that nationalism has created, they certainly can be aware of these tendencies. And then we have some, when you look at this group of young extremists, they are really young mostly, and they don't have any memories of these kind of things. They are denying Holocaust, and they are doing this and that, and it's a kind of, it's not a straightforward phenomenon, but on general level we can say that nationalism is maybe getting stronger. And here, of course, nationalism can appear in many forms. As we know, there can be separation nationalism, and this comes into play inside states often, so that we can have ethno-regionalistic movements, or they can become ethno-nationalistic and then claim separation. And then we have these old nationalisms, and there are many kind of forms that we have to think carefully when we talk about the resurgence of nationalism, I think.
So what insights about the world, besides your own, do you enjoy returning to on a cold winter's night in Oulu? Whose scholarship from past or present do you like to flip through?
Yeah, I basically try to follow quite widely what is going on in some specific fields. For example, border literature. I have so huge pile of border literature that I'm waiting for the day that I can start seriously to read them. And of course, regional theory debates, which are also nowadays interdisciplinary, I try to follow them. And also, you mentioned this rise of nationalism. I want to focus also in these issues more seriously, and especially ethno-nationalism, which is a new tendency, or not new tendency, but it's something that many of these right-wing movements seem to promote. And I often also return to classical texts when I'm writing articles. So I try to keep this historical tuning, let's say. So I don't think that we only have to follow a couple of years back and cite those authors. For example, I'm thinking Sean Gottman, Ed Souza, Bob Sack, who are constantly on my desk, and I return to these texts, and many others, of course. Peter Taylor and John Agnew, you cannot pass him. He has published so much that it's important, and of course Alec Murphy and many others.
What do you believe could fundamentally challenge political geography 20, 30 years moving forward?
Sorry, I missed. I was thinking. Yeah,
that's okay. I'm not sure I even like the question, but I think it's related to the interdisciplinary. You mentioned interdisciplinarity, for example.
Yeah.
And I guess the question put more succinctly would be, do you think that there's still a role for disciplinary boundaries in the future, or do you think we're moving towards a space where we won't need to have a commission on political geography because we all think in these ways in various other disciplines as well?
Yeah, I don't think that we are giving up political geography. There will be disciplinary boundaries to some extent, but I hope that there will be also more cross-border cooperation in social science fields and political sciences, let's say so. Of course, there are some tendencies that lead to some sort of separation. They have separate publishing forums. I think that in geography, political geography and geopolitics, they have quite interdisciplinary nature, so that they are attracting papers from other fields. But in many other fields, they are probably more strictly bounded. So in the long run, maybe some things change, and of course the whole academy is changing, so that they want to push us to problem-based thinking and break disciplinary boundaries, which is I don't like this idea. So that I like strong disciplines. For example, in our university, we don't have any more departments. We have research units, which is a very strange expression when I'm thinking that we also teach. So it's clearly gives an impression what is important and what is not. So I don't know if they have really thought this issue when they have decided these new labels.
So in terms of Finland, how has political geography developed in Finland, vis-a-vis as a sort of a country between great powers, if you will, historically? How did you become interested? Well, let's just start with that. So how is it that Finland came to be on the map for political geography?
Yeah, Finland came on we were under Russian regime at that time in the 18th, 19th centuries, and Finnish Geographical Society was established in 1888, and it was very important in promoting, let's say, national thinking. But it took decades before Finland became independent, and the first atlas of the world was published in Finland, actually. So Finland was quite progressive at that stage, and then. Political geography first books were published when Finland became independent in 1917. In the 20s, these books came out, and only 3 years later, Xellen published his State as a Form of Life. It was translated into Finnish, so this was quite important background. And In the 30s, Finland was quite a lot oriented towards Germany, and as you know, Finland was allied with Nazis during continuation war, 1941-44, and of course that was a very curious stage of the Finnish history. But then after World War II, political geography was in a way non-existing. It was not actively promoted, or it was not visible. And also these regimes of truth, to use the expression of Foucault, they changed so that the relation between Finland and Soviet Union became sort of taboo, so that not geographers were interested in border issues. Only few books were published before Soviet Union collapsed, and they were mainly for student use. So I think that when I started in the 80s, the border was still very closed, Russian-Soviet border actually at that time, and I needed a permission from border guards to go to interview people in the frontier zone, and foreign people like a group from UK who wanted to film in that area. They needed permission from security police, so that was quite tough at that time. But when Soviet Union collapsed, I had been doing my own research since '87, collected materials, interviewed people, and when the collapse happened and the border opened finally, so that gave a strong boost, as you perhaps have recognized, for Finnish political geographers, so that many people became interested in border issues, but also other political geographic issues. And it's expanding still today. We have people who are interested in children's politics like Kirsi-Pauliina Kallio and many other things. So I think that it's very vibrant at the moment still.
And was there a specific event or teacher that you had that got your interest in political geography peaked as a student?
No, that was really part of my institutionalization theory. As I mentioned, I went to the border area to study a small community after studying Finnish provinces. And I had a feeling that I need to go to local level to get to know better what people are thinking about this spatiality, so to say, and place dimension. So I made my first interviews in Wärtsilä, which was divided by the old border, and I recognized how people, different generations, shaped the world in very different ways. Younger generations took this new border as a fact, and old generations were still missing to the closed Karelia, and it was very divided idea. So I started to read seriously political geographical literature, what they tell about borders, and anthropologists and what other fields also. So that was some kind of aha phenomenon for me, so that I found a new terrain to go on. But it was part of my idea of institutionalization, and I pushed this idea to several scales, as I did in my Territories, Boundaries and Consciousness book, which was a sort of summary of my almost 10 years long project on the border area, and in a way local study, regional study and state study put into international wider framework.
So we've asked a few people about this Anglophone hegemony in geography. You've been gracious enough to speak with us in English, and obviously I would not be able to ask these questions in Finnish. So you've written quite a bit about this, about the political geography of knowledge production. You may have seen Martin Muller just has done some work published on sort of the journals and where people are publishing, and this hegemony as well. So we want to get your perspective on this Anglophone hegemony and where that's headed and where it's been.
Yeah, I actually just have written an article using autobiography, so that I tried to put my institutionalization work into a longer historical perspective, what I have found and experienced, and it's coming in a book next year, Nordic social theory in geographies or something like that. But I tried to figure out there, and there are different impacts that made me interested in this issue. One was the fact that when I moved from University of Eastern Finland, or Joensuu, University of Joensuu at that time, it was largely social scientific and humanistic university. When I came to Oulu, this was very much a technical and natural science university. So I personally experienced this pressure from strong natural sciences that were arguing that geography is actually nothing because you are not publishing internationally. So that was the really first time when I was thinking these kind of issues, even if I had published something in English, but it was not anymore a personal issue, but it started to impact what happened to the department and if we get money or if we don't get. So it became a structural problem. And when I found out these discussions that started around the millennium by Lawrence Berg and many others about this hegemony, so I became immediately interested that this is exactly the problem that I have been facing personally also here. And then I started to analyze these publication forums, published something in Environment and Planning A on this global writing space, and I have written maybe 3-4 papers at different times on this issue, and it is important issue. But as I mentioned, so it seems at the moment that at least political geography is internationalizing rapidly. But it means, unfortunately, the hegemony of English language, I think, because when you look at old Anglophone scholars and their books, Hartshorne, many others, so you can see that they were using French literature, German literature, maybe Italian literature, and many kind of literatures. And now it's becoming narrower, this horizon and linguistic horizon. And I don't know if we can do anything for that. Martin Müller had in this paper some guidelines what people could do to promote internationalization, and he seemed to be also worried about this citation patterns or something like that, so that Anglophone people don't cite people outside of this Anglophone core, even if they publish in English. So that was maybe the problem, and it's part of this wider problem, I think, that many people are talking about now in sociology and psychology, international relations, question of recognition. So that we see this in international relations. Putin is at the moment waiting for recognition, but this same psychological basic pattern seems to be occurring in many social spheres today.
So do you have any other reflections about the last 100 years of political geography that might be relevant for this project?
Yeah, I think that it will be we'll have another 100 years healthy period, but on the other hand, there will be very serious problems that I tried to mention earlier when you asked this, and I'm thinking that my 3 grandchildren are now a couple of years old, so they all are very likely going to see the next almost next 100 years what happens, and I don't see the future very bright. Let's hope that the humanity finds some kind of solution to many problems that we have now, and probably much more in the future.